we'll stall for time, as I say on the tennis court when I'm losing, to wait for Randy.
Right, we're live now.
Okay. Good morning, everybody, and good morning, members of the public. We're waiting for Senator Brock, who should be with us shortly, and also Senator Ballant. But Senator Brock had a wrong Zoom address, so he should be joining us momentarily. We're going to start off by talking with Heather Pelham about the administration's request. I think it's for like 8.6 million. Is that correct, Heather? Something in that neighborhood?
In that range, 8.46, yes.
Okay. And how that's broken down, how that was arrived at. And just a general update, we haven't seen you, I think, since the beginning of the session, how things are going. Why don't I turn it over to you and you can introduce yourself and tell us what you want us to hear.
Well, I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everybody. For the record, my name is Heather Pelham, and I am the Commissioner of the Department of Tourism and Marketing. Happy to be with you folks again. You're right, it's been quite a year since we last spoke. I'm happy to talk about the administration's proposal first, or if you'd rather a general overview, whichever you would prefer.
Let's do the general overview and then get into the administration's proposal.
Okay. So just to orient folks, we are still analyzing and calculating exactly what the overall economic impacts of the pandemic are on the travel and tourism industry. We're actually trying to put together a benchmark report for both 2019 and 2020 to be able to really document exactly what we're seeing. But just to ground us, initial estimates from 2020, visitor spending was down 650 million. That's 25% loss compared to 2019. And, that doesn't even get us into 2021. One thing I would note is as we talk about economic impacts with travel and tourism, our losses were absolutely mitigated by the impact of second homeowners who spent long amounts of time here during the pandemic and folks who stayed in short-term rentals as they changed their patterns of where they felt safe to spend the time of the pandemic. So that actually helped stem some of our losses. But again, just visitation, normally we see 13 million visitors come. In 2020, that was down almost 40% to 8 million. And even those numbers, underestimate the impacts. Traditional lodging was down 50%. Restaurants pivoted best they could, but down out-of-state spending 30%. We saw severe losses in all sorts of different pockets in the events industry. Food and beverage at ski resorts was down 70%. We know cultural facilities, some still haven't reopened. So even in the numbers in aggregate are compelling, they don't even begin to kind of capture the severe impacts to individual businesses. So all that to say, sorry, go ahead, Senator Clarkson.
Senator Clarkson.
Oh, do you have you sent Scott that update those figures? Because I think we'd appreciate those.
I can follow up. I can absolutely follow up with that. The numbers are a little bit more, I shouldn't say they're fluid, but trying to actually calculate exactly what happened over the last year is challenging. So I would be happy to do that. But I just wanted to give that as a general framing for now.
Now, in that general framing, Heather, was that from 2019 to 20? You said not to even consider 2021. Do we not have numbers yet from 2021?
We're getting the numbers for 2021. There's a delay in the data, so it's not as real time as you might think. So in terms of figuring out what the aggregate losses are, we think the aggregate losses over the pandemic in visitor spending total about $1 billion. So it's a big number in terms of what we're seeing over to 2020 and 2021.
We're trying to deal with, as you know, economic recovery grants, and I can't say I have a real handle on whether businesses are back or, some businesses still are threatened with closure or are facing a 2022 that would be nightmarish for them. I just don't have a handle, especially in the tourist area.
Well, I mean, I'd be more than happy to have, some folks from the industry join and tell their story. I would say it's quite variable and definitely not out of the woods yet by any means.
Okay.
So we can look at we did have high occupancy, figures this summer. There we did see a pent up demand for travel, but that doesn't begin to put a dent into the huge losses that businesses saw. And then even now, as we see as new variants come up, visitation is still very much, we can't take that for granted. With the wedding and events business, they lost all of last year. So even though 2022 is shining up to be a banner year, they're looking at, they took deposits that now they have to make good on, and so they're not actually probably making new money until 2023. With attractions, we saw that there was good visitation, but it's really kind of all over the place because, again, for like our cultural facilities, they were not able to necessarily open anything that has that sort of in-person component. So it's I would say a bit of a mixed bag. Folks are still trying to do their best. Workforce is, the theme of the day with everything that we're doing, that there's staffing shortages everywhere. So that goes, not just in our restaurants, which, are, on the front lines of that struggle right now, but in all of our lodging facilities and, just businesses of every shape and size is really struggling with that. And so when they don't have the workforce, or if the workforce is out, then they're reducing their services they can offer, they're reducing their hours of operation. All of that makes for, a difficult business climate to actually be profitable. So I would say we're definitely very much still in the recovery mode.
So I guess one thing that I'd be curious about is the ski industry, as indicative of whether people are traveling from out of state to Vermont this winter. I assume last winter was an unmitigated disaster, but this winter, are people back, or are they still gun shy about traveling, or is there that pent up demand that, we're getting good numbers from the ski industry so far? Do you know?
I would definitely defer to Molly Mahar to have her come in and give you in depth. From what we're hearing, there was pent up demand over the holidays. And I would say that in terms of the wave of Omicron, we actually benefited from the timing that it hadn't quite hit, so that we did see good traffic, both retail in our downtowns as well as at the ski resorts over the holiday season. But that said, nowadays, what I hear is that the bookings are coming fast and they're getting canceled just as fast. Plus we've had weather challenges. Not only did we not have early snow, but now with this tremendous cold, it's not as conducive to a great day on the slopes. So, so again, it's up and down, and it is still very uncertain.
Gotcha. Okay.
And just on the workforce, I would just say that the one other data point that I do have is that 2020 shows that we were down 7,000 jobs in the tourism sector. So that in and of itself is both a short and a long term, real threatening stance for our recovery. So I can go into the relocation network proposal as it does relate to workforce. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, may I add on a question to that?
Yes.
The workforce tourism has in its pocket, in some ways, well, other pieces of our economy also have this, but how are you doing with negotiating with our congressional delegation on expanding our H-2B visas? Our visa program has been capped at 66,000 people nationally, is what I understand, and that is, we are all desperate at the moment that's one of what I think people thought was a low-hanging fruit that we could push Congress to expand. And if you could just give us an update on that piece of the workforce, that's an important piece for many of us.
Yeah, it's definitely, always an active conversation in terms of how we can get that cap raised. We've seen that different employers have had different success, whether it's the J1 visas or the H2B, in the sense that we've seen that employers have had a better luck being able to employ folks who are already in country and maybe had a summer position, and then being able to bring them on for a winter position. So say at our, ski resorts. So that has been more successful than necessarily getting somebody in country for the first time because of all the visa requirements and just travel and vaccines and so forth coming from different countries. So I will say that's one part of it in terms of the strategy of how we can access that part of the workforce.
Right.
Is really looking at that, kind of the 12 months of employment. But to your point, it's well taken that is still a pressure point where we can work with the delegation in raising.
And is that a priority? I mean, and are you guys actively working on that?
I would say for the Department of Tourism, it's not necessarily like on top of like my personal priority, but in terms of keeping in touch with everybody who has, who can speak on that very personal level about this is what it means for my business. We try and facilitate all of those conversations. It's part of the workforce piece. There is no doubt. Yeah. I would say that it's, workforce becomes part of it's the wraparound of everything that the travel and tourism sector needs to be successful. So we try and concentrate on our role in terms of promoting and increasing visitation, and then also being that conduit with industry in terms of making sure that they have access to folks who, really need to hear their particular perspective on what might be needed, whether it's federal legislation or, different parts of policy that don't necessarily go through the Department of Tourism, but, might be to do with, unemployment insurance or something else that is not my personal area of expertise, but still affects the industry as a whole. If that answers your question. So like I said, in terms of just, again, high level of sort of where we've been, we did have additional funding that was allocated to the department for destination marketing this past summer. Again, our role is really to promote the state, despite any barriers there may be to travel, to make sure that, we recognize there is that pent up demand for travel, but we still face a lot of competition. Every destination is desperate for visitors to return. And we also want to recapture some of those folks who might have tried alternative destinations when, our rules were so strict in the past. We continue to work to try and reach new and diverse audiences and still, leveraging that very strong brand position that we have with safety. So, I can go into more details, whether it's this morning or another time, in terms of all the different components of our campaign this past summer, but we were able to work on a couple of different video projects, as well as an out-of-home campaign that we did in the New York City metro area, that saw our advertisements throughout the commuter rail network. We were able to do national advertising on streaming services like Hulu, Outside TV, and the digital networks, with some of the brand assets we were able to create with the CRF funding. So we want to, stretch those resources as far as we can. We also did a fair amount of sponsored content projects this past summer. That's where we work with a content platform and their editorial staff to write stories about Vermont. And it's a way that we can not only leverage the networks of those partners, but make sure that our message is reaching far beyond our own audiences, and it gives us a chance to highlight individual properties and experiences, giving not only visitors specific ideas about where they might go, but it gives national exposure to our local businesses. So we're able to work in some of our strategic priorities in terms of the partnerships that we went after. So we worked with the Edge Media Network, which is a content platform with an LGBTQ readership, to reach more, to be more intentional, let's say, about how we represent the state. We worked on 4 articles and some associated email marketing, social media with them, that we actually achieved an average of 8 minutes on page, which is about 4 times what we would normally get, and it's industry average. With a bunch of different pieces of content. We worked with Travel Noir, which is a travel site that describes itself as a platform for Black voices, stories, and creators. We did a piece with them on 24 Hours in Black-owned Vermont, 7 Reasons to Visit, for autumn, all sorts of different kinds of things that you could do here.
Heather,
We partnered with, yeah.
Last year, you, I think, presented us with some beautiful color graphs and flow charts and budget things. Do you have something similar?
I can put all that together. I wasn't sure how much of the detail you want to go into today.
Well, we don't have to go into a lot of detail on that today. We're more interested in the proposal going forward. But I would like to see in visual form, where you spent your money, areas where you're in charge, like what's the Stay and Stay or whatever, that program and marketing. And did you also have some money to give away to the chambers of commerce too?
Yep, we did. So I can put together some visuals for that. I'd also love for you to take a look at some of these creative projects, some of these videos that we're able to create. I really think you would hopefully find them to be inspiring. So I'm happy to provide that.
Yeah. Send Scott all of that. We'll have it posted and we'll try and look at it. Maybe also have you back. But if you want to touch upon in general some more overview, fine. But then let's go into the budget for FY.
Okay, I can do that. So those are just some, different examples of, we work to create content that showcases the state. And again, I think that's probably better if I come back and can show you some visuals for that. We also did work with the Arts Council on a campaign this summer, Stages in the Sun, to kind of get folks back out and enjoying live music together. So, all sorts of, that actually had a component where we're able to help those events have a pop-up vaccine clinic if they were interested in that, to kind of be able to be that conduit for aiding the industry and our vaccination efforts. So I will just say that, what all that adds up to is that we are seeing, a tremendous increase in impressions naturally due to the increase in resources. So we, our web traffic is up 40% over what it was in 2019, with these new resources. We have 80% more impressions than we had 2 years ago. We're seeing increases in all sorts of goal conversions as to, how we measure our success. So I can put those into some graphs and so forth to show you folks how all that looks. And then just briefly on the tourism and economic recovery grants, those we are executing the final agreements right now. That was the $600,000 appropriation that we had last session. We got 41 applications for that. We were able to fund 22 projects, which again, I can give you a full report on where those monies are going. We had a maximum grant of $30,000 that, as you mentioned, would go to chambers of commerce and other types of organizations like that. Those are, we looked at projects that would not only increase, visitation, both from out of state and from other regions, but would be potentially transformational, long-term if possible, campaigns that reached underrepresented audiences, and also projects that would create assets that would live beyond the length of just the grant term. So those are being executed right now. The scope of work will go from now for the next 12 months, and they will all be complete by March 2023. But there's a great list of communities.
You're expecting the money to go out this month?
Yes. Yep. And we wanted to make sure that we had a full 12 months where folks could use that money, so that, because in one community it might make sense for them to do something in the spring, and another community makes sense for them to do something in the fall. And so we want to make sure that they had the full calendar year to really find that event or that promotional campaign that would really be impactful for them to affect visitation in their own local region. So
that was all one-time money, and the projects were screened to be for one-time purposes. Folks are not going to come back and say, I need to keep this going and I need more money.
No, it was very clear that it's one-time money. It is definitely being leveraged. So, some folks will be using that for assets, let's say website, itineraries, videos, the kind of thing that will help showcase their particular corner of Vermont that will live beyond the length of the grant. So in that sense, I would say it is it's not just a one-time effect. Some regions are looking at creating either new festivals or increasing, what they can do with events already in place to be able to affect visitation. So again, once they kind of get those events to the next level, they hopefully will have a little bit of a life of their own. So that's what we were really looking for, is like, where could this one-time money make the most difference in terms of, not just affecting, one day or point in time, but really is something that the community could use that would have longer term effects.
Is there any coordination with the Better Places $5 million that I understand has just been announced? I mean, are people combining money from one program to another and with another?
That's interesting. I haven't heard of a very specific example, but they certainly support each other. And, especially when we're looking at communities who are thinking about doing events and having folks in public spaces,
Right.
the more that those spaces are accommodating to visitors, clearly the more successful they'll be.
Okay.
So if we want to switch to the relocation proposal, I did provide a slide on that I can put up on the screen if you folks would like, which is just kind of like a high level of what that's all about, if we want to get into the nitty gritty of that.
Yep, we're interested in that.
Okay. So why don't I go ahead and see if I can share my screen.
While you're doing that, just give me a feel again of what the size of your department or division, whatever, I think it's department, overall budget is, and how much of it is just administrative and how much goes out in terms of direct services or grants to consultants or third parties.
Sure. So we have a staff of 12. Historically, our budget was about 3.5 million. We did have one-time funds through CRF. And then last session, they were general. So through CRF, we had an additional 6.5 million. Some of that went out in consumer stimulus. Some of that was for destination marketing. And then last session, we had an additional $2 million that was appropriated for the destination marketing campaign that I just mentioned, as well as those grants. So, our budget, looks different now than it ever did before. Generally speaking, it's about 2/3 of the budget that goes into the paid marketing activities in terms of actually buying advertising time and sponsoring content versus the work that's done on the staff level in terms of either owned media or, general support for the industry, events, and so forth. So I can give you a budget breakdown if you'd like for that too.
Yeah, I would. I just want to, before we go forward, I just want to get a general feel. So your base budget had been about 3.5 million, and you got an infusion of a lot of one-time money. Is your base budget in FY23? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Is that going to go back to 3.5 million, or are you asking for more base funding this year? And is it all general fund or is it special funds? That's what I'm just trying to do.
We're not asking for more base funding this year. And I would say that the major reason for that is that, and this is something else that I can get more into details, the state is going to be receiving a grant from the Economic Development Administration, from the EDA. So through ARPA, they have a special travel, tourism, outdoor recreation grant program, of which there was a non-competitive grant for all of the states. The amount of that grant was proportional on the losses felt by each state for travel, tourism, and outdoor rec. Coming to Vermont is $10.4 million.
Ooh.
So, yes. So that is
over what period of time do you have to spend?
Over 2 years.
Okay.
We have 2 years to spend that. We have not received that money yet. It is promised to the state, but we have not gone through the process with joint fiscal yet in terms of, applying for that money, so to speak. And we need to work on what the scope of work is with the EDA. But that money is available for destination marketing. And so, there is not an ask for an increase in our base budget this year with that in mind, and knowing the other priorities that are out there.
So let me ask you this question. Can you use that money for like events, or directly giving help to some of the businesses out there that are hurting in terms of cultural activities, or not?
We're not allowed to subgrant to any for-profit entity. So no, it can't be used for business assistance. It also cannot be used for relocation or recruitment. It's pretty strict and specific to supporting travel and recreation. But we can use it for destination marketing. We can use it for strategic planning efforts that we'd like to undertake in terms of, how do we help, affect that sort of long-term resiliency of the sector. We can use it to do some brand study work, which we have not been able to do for years and years. We're looking at doing some more visitation research, the kinds of projects that, we just never have the resources to do, but would really be impactful for us to be able to articulate, what is the brand story that Vermont has? What are we seeing in visitation trends? How can we make the most of that? How can we support the industry as we look to the future in terms of sustainability, sustainable tourism, avoiding over tourism in certain spaces that we've seen in outdoor rec, as, just some of the pressures from the pandemic. How do we approach, what climate change might look like, and all sorts of kind of transfer, what does the next 10 years of tourism in Vermont look like? So those are some of the conversations that we've had with EDA so far, but we're also looking at, are there smaller projects that we can do? Can we work on a talent pipeline project specifically for travel and tourism? Can we work on an infrastructure investment? It would have to be something that the department would subgrant to another state agency. So there's limitations on what we could do, but could we work with our state parks, for instance, in terms of, making sure that they have, whether it's Wi-Fi or like new pavilions for visitation, or, something like that, that would impact visitation. So we're still going through those conversations with the EDA as to what we can do with that money, but it is limited to specifically increasing visitation as well as this resiliency component. And that, we may be able to do some subgrants to our regions, or maybe co-op marketing programs with our regions to supplement their efforts. But like I said, it can't be used for relocation, and it can't be used for for-profit entities.
No, but very exciting and very exciting.
Extremely.
For data, really thinking strategically about what additional data you want to be able to collect, but haven't been able to set that up or finance that underpinning tech work that needs to collect that data and analyze it. And oh my gosh, there's so many opportunities in this for you.
It is huge. We had some roundtable meetings at the end of the summer where we gathered in Manchester and Rutland and in Stow to kind of begin conversations with the industry on, what they would find helpful, just really trying to understand, like, what are the key barriers to either what the future is going to hold for the industry, and how we can affect them, or how the department can be most impactful. Is that the research piece of it? If, what is our part in workforce? What is our part in destination marketing? How can we be most effective? So we'll be doing more of that convening and more of that, kind of strategic planning. That's where we're starting with that. And then, we do have implementation money to actually, keep Vermont top of mind, and to make sure that we're, protecting our market share.
So you mentioned, it can't be used for profits, but it seems to me like a lot of the cultural events are probably run by nonprofits or maybe by municipalities. So I'm thinking like the Jazz Festival in Burlington. If that's a success, that brings a lot of tourism dollars in. Could they approach you and ask for help?
Well, we could do, anything and everything we do out of that grant funding has to be a competitive procurement. So, but we could run an RFP program potentially for events, as long as it fit the EDA's criteria.
Okay.
They would need to benefit a nonprofit. The organization would have to be organized as a nonprofit.
Just
Um,
as an aside, I don't know if you ever got involved, but someone approached me 2 years ago to move the Stow tennis tournament to Burlington on the lake. And I thought that was a great idea. Nothing ever came of it, but to have a professional tournament like that in a setting like Burlington probably could meet all the concerns of lack of attendance that Stowe had, but it was a great event. Uh, and I don't know if you've heard anything about that since.
I mean, I have heard that, the state generally does get approached, and I would say not just the department, but, partners within the state do get approached about what it would take to bring large events here. We haven't had the kind of seed funding that other states have to be able to influence those decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So that is, I would say, something that we could look into in terms of, the ability to kind of use this EDA funding where it can be most impactful.
Okay, yeah, that sounds like something that could be a home run. But okay, let's go on this chart here.
Okay, so this is, I did want to try and provide a visual aid for the Relocation Network proposal that the administration has put together.
And just for everybody, it's on our webpage if people want to look at it on a separate device a little more closely.
Okay. So the total price tag is 8.46 million, but I would point out from the beginning that this is a 3-year program. And that's, we feel is a very important part of this. So it's 2.82 million per year for 3 years. And then you can see on the left side how that gets broken down. And basically this program is designed to support the informal network that has been developed over the last couple of years. So we've been, this is building on the state-to-state program that we first launched back in 2018. And really, what were the lessons that we learned from that? That particular program has been on hold through COVID, but the regions themselves have been trying to increase their capacity to do the relocation work. We haven't been able to provide any funding to them. But, just like it is with visitation, our role is at the top of the funnel. It's getting those leads into Think Vermont and then pushing them down to our local partners to be able to really, to make the case and to basically complete the sale on the local level. So this proposal looks at both sides of that. So, at the very top, it's like, how do we fill that pipeline with leads through broad-based and through targeted marketing? And then how do we make sure that the regions have the resources they need to really nurture those leads? So, on the marketing side, we see this would be resources for Think Vermont to again, similar themes, increase the reach of our messaging. So we have that basically, we're thinking of it that it'd be split between, broad awareness for Vermont as a great place to live and work, but then also being very deliberate in our targeting for some of the most in-demand professions. So I know, folks are hearing all about nursing, healthcare, as well as in the trades. So, we recognize that would be a big part of this proposal, is being very targeted, and how can we work with the, not only the other incentive programs that we have out there, but really, think about like where we can really move the needle with this marketing effort to be able to get folks into Vermont that are so desperately in demand. We also see that there's going to be a part of this that we would want to be making sure that we're reaching out to new and diverse audiences, as with everything else that we're doing. So a component of this targeted advertising would also be to make sure that, we can work with a creative agency of color to make sure that our imagery and our messaging is as broad and representative and impactful to all sorts of different communities. Those leads then would come into Think Vermont. Right now we've been working on what that sort of handoff process is with the region. So we have been working to kind of streamline that process. We have a connect with a Vermonter form when folks are interested in moving with the state, that then depending on which regions folks are interested in, they get funneled to those regions with specific resources and follow-up. We're seeing about 150 inquiries per month right now without promoting that. And so we hope to at least double that, if not more. And then again, this work with the Relocation Network really goes hand in hand with the relocated and remote worker incentives, because as folks are kind of moving their way down the funnel, it's those type of incentive programs, as well as some of the, the healthcare incentives that the governor has also proposed that can not only drive the leads, but then really convince folks that Vermont is the place for them. So that's 1.5 million each year. We're going to that part of the effort. And then, down at the bottom of the funnel, and this is, where we think it's really going to be even more transformational, is that, we know that relocation efforts are most successful when folks on the ground level can offer that very personal individual assistance. So helping folks find a house, connect with local employers, find childcare, get connected to the local social networks, whether that's, other families with school-age kids or young professionals, or, networks for BIPOC individuals, or any kind of interest group that might, when folks are feeling trying to figure out, is this community going to be for me? They want to find those individual connections. So that work is really best done on a local level. It takes time, it takes capacity, and it takes systems to be developed. So the fact that we're thinking about this as a 3-year investment, that's, really key for us, is that we know that it does take time. So the way that we've budgeted is that it would be 1.2 million per year for the regions. That would be split $100,000 each to each of 12 regions. Think of the regions, roughly to like what the RDC regions are. And so over the course of this proposal, $300,000 for a region, we think that will be incredibly transformational in terms of bringing their recruitment, relocation, and honestly retention work to the next level, because it will give them that capacity, not only human capacity, but also just in terms of planning to be, how can they actually build some systems, and how can we give them some sustainability and predictability in that work. We would do this through a RFP, as to which is the right entity in each region that would be able to fulfill this scope of work. The annual grant agreements would provide a mechanism for us to have reporting and performance metrics, that not only would make sure that the communities are being successful, but that we can have metrics that we can aggregate broadly to see how, if we are moving the needle, in fact. We do so that so this support would really be like the baseline of support that would be create that backbone of this network.
So let me ask you a question. In terms of moving the needle, do you have any numbers or metrics so far from like this, is it called Stay to Stay program? How many people that program has been in contact with over the years, how many people actually came to Vermont, and you somehow feel like, not that it necessarily has to be determinative in their decision to move here, but that you put a lot of effort into those people and were successful. I mean, we're obviously in this committee big fans of the Relocated Worker program, and it goes through some criticism that maybe 150 people have moved here as a result of it. I mean, there's strong defenses that thousands of people who in-migrate may have first heard of this idea and thought about Vermont and thought of it as a welcoming place, may not needed the reimbursement money, but because of the publicity around that program decided to look further into Vermont. So I'm just trying to, and there was a report done that strongly showed the benefit to the state of the small investment we made there. What do you have to show for Stay to Stay comparably?
So I would say the state-to-state numbers are much smaller in the fact that just so folks know, that was an effort that was about having folks come on specific weekends, organized around what the individual communities might also be doing. Didn't have funding behind it. It was really like a way to kind of like galvanize some of that earned media, as you mentioned, that remote worker was able to capture in terms of like giving folks a flavor for like, yes, come to the state for a weekend and really see what it's all about, meet with local employers and so forth. I can provide for you, like I could say in 2019, which is when we were last running those weekends, we did have 250 people come to those events. That's not a huge number of people, but in terms of those folks who then, we see everybody like on a continuum of, folks who actually have relocated or not, in terms of like how likely they are to move. So we see that most people, it's going to take years for them to actually move to the state. I don't have it on top of my head. I think the total was about 300 people totals. But I don't want to misquote myself on that. So I'll have to look up the last numbers from 2019. But I guess I would say like State to State was one program which has been great. And it was a way for us, like I said, to leverage that. But the real relocation work is what's happening on the regional level. So it's not just the leads that come in through the state. It may be leads that come in from local employers. It may be leads from their own relocation efforts, and gathering that data on how many folks have moved is really one of the challenges that we're trying to solve by formalizing this network, is because we don't have a great way to collect data. So even if I can tell you this person came to a State to Stay event in 2019, do I actually know if they moved here? I only know that if they stayed in touch with the region they went to and they actually told them that they moved here. Mm-hmm. We would like to be able to provide you and the state and everyone with much better data than that. And so if we can, so we see that one of the keys to doing that is giving each of the regions this, baseline of support, basically a toolbox that they can work with, where they can report back to us, not only did someone actually end up moving here, but, what's their level, how many times have they spoken to somebody about, moving here if they may not move here for another X number of years, were we able to connect them with local employers? Were we able to,
So let me see if did someone have their hand up? I can't see. No.
Well, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Senator Ballin, I had a question for Heather. When you talk about working with regional partners, are you referring to RDCs or other regional partners? That's my first question.
So it depends. Right now, we work with a combination. We work with some RDCs, we work with some chambers of commerce, we work with some downtown organizations. Yep. So that's why we're thinking that this would be an RFP process for the region to figure out which is the entity that's really best suited for this work. Because as much as we want, so we want to have like what's the aggregate effect and be able to kind of talk about that in the same metrics for, across regions. All regions are different. And so, some folks have different systems in place already that we want to build on, not tell them to do it a different way.
Yeah. So just a quick follow-up. So coming off of the tour that the speaker and I did this past fall and into the winter, the question I think that hangs over all of this, we know that we need more workers, right? We've got tens of thousands of jobs that are unfilled. But we also have this housing crisis that we're all talking about. To what extent do you have a sense of where is there currently available housing capacity, and how does that match up with the jobs that are also open?
Yeah, it's a huge issue. I'm not going to pretend it's not. I guess, my answer to that is like, if there's available housing, it's the folks in the local market who will know that. Like that's where somebody can say, and we hope it's not on a one-on-one level. I mean, that's a hard way to bring folks into the state if we have to do it one house or one apartment at a time.
Yes, it is. It is.
You are very well aware of, all the state's effort to increase the units of housing, to rehab units and so forth. I see this as a complementary to that effect, so that like as units are coming online, and as who's going to know that best and be able to really say, this is the time, we can help you make that connection. It's the folks in the community who are going to best be able to do that. And so that's where we see that we really need to support basically what they've been trying to do on their own, basically on a volunteer effort.
Mhm.
But it's just so important that it's, this is not going to solve the housing crisis or vice versa. But I also see that, we can't also, I don't feel like we can wait to have like all of the new units, quote unquote, online and open before we start the conversation of moving to Vermont. We need to be doing it at the same time.
Thanks, Heather.
Yeah.
Sure.
And Mr. Chair, may I ask?
I'm sorry, I don't have your pictures up. So shout.
Oh, okay. Heather, it's Allison. I think that the data collection, I mean, it's what's exciting about your EDA money is that you'll be able to build a data collection and system for these sub-programs, some of which can't be financed by ARPA money. This regional relocation program proposal is not, sadly, able to, we're not able to use ARPA money for that. But the data collection system upon which so much of our analysis and of the effect and success of these programs is dependent, will be. So that this is in many ways a great marrying of two needs.
Yeah, and I love data as much as the next person, believe me. I mean, it's been one of the mantras, since I've come to the department. And I would say, in one of the places that we're missing it is we have a pretty good idea in total, but even down to the very local level, we hear from local downtown organizations, for instance, all the time, like, how can I really speak to visitation in my town, not just in Vermont, and right. So how can, we be a conduit to kind of help advance some of that work at the same time. And so, and it takes systems to do that. It takes, like, how are we going to collect this information, and how do we help the local organizations collect this effort, so we do know when somebody literally moves here, or they, when they get a job, where are they working, how can they push that up to the state level? I didn't touch on that, but you can see in the slide, the proposal also does include one staff member so that we're able to support this network. A big part of that is reporting, and also to be able to leverage if a region is needs to bring in the Department of Labor or AHS or one of the other state entities that might need to help on an individual relocation basis, that we have the capacity to be able to do. We're asking the local folks to do that one-on-one concierge type service. We also want to make sure that they also have the support that they need when we're asking for data and reporting, and how do we measure the success of this program.
So Heather, is this money general fund money, or from that pot you were talking about?
This would be general fund money. This type of work, this relocation work, is not eligible for ARPA or for EDA.
Okay. And is this something that you've been doing already on a limited, uncoordinated basis, and you're putting more money and you're formalizing it and structuring it for performance data? Is that a fair statement, that with the various programs you've had, whether it's referrals to job openings or the ambassador programs, Think Vermont, is that all been in play in your base budget, and this is more money for similar things in a more structured, fact-based or data-based format?
It would be, but just to clarify, we have not had funding to do this type of work in the past. There was some one-time funding for Think Vermont that went back a couple of sessions that we used to build out, that program. But Stay to Stay really did not have a budget. The department supplemented that to help regions on a very limited basis to pay for some of their expenses for events. But there wasn't a budget behind that. It's just been staff time for us to convene with the regions and then kind of work on this lead generation pipeline. So all of that has just been that work that we've recognized, across the agency. So working with Joan and her team in terms of, how do we affect that decision on all levels. So like, when folks are interested in the remote work or the relocated worker program, how do we also make sure that then they're connected to the regions when they actually are looking for a community to settle down into. So this really is the first time that there would be resources of any really significant level put towards this effort.
If somebody today, even without this money, makes an inquiry or an application to the Relocated Worker Program, are they connected to your department or to other people to help them with other areas to facilitate their move to encourage them? Or is that they're just an application in a pipeline that may or may not get funded? I mean, they're ripe for encouragement, I would think, at that point. Who contacts them?
Right. Well, I mean, so with the relocated worker program, they would already have had to move here. So they might have come into our pipeline previously, but they wouldn't come into our pipeline after they apply for the program because they would already be here. So but they may have, been, if they had been interested in moving to the state in the past, they might have gotten on the, our newsletter list, for instance, or been following us on social media, or otherwise, might be informed of our efforts. But there must be like hundreds or thousands of people who make inquiries into the program who don't necessarily follow up and apply and get rejected for whatever reason. Aren't they in the group of people that would be ripe to contact on a one-to-one basis? They are, and that's why the relocated worker application is on the Think Vermont site. So it's the folks are coming into the same front door, so to speak, and they can either apply for the program if they are eligible and they have already moved here, or if they're just interested, then they can go through our Connect with a Vermonter form, learn more about the different regions. So they're in the same place.
Yeah, but it sounds to me like you're saying they need to find and follow up themselves from the website to see what other services, as opposed to maybe using some of this money to target those people. I mean, I think we all know that, you put your name into Zillow or something like that, and you're marked for life. You start getting all these emails and stuff. And sometimes it could be annoying, but it's from a business perspective. They realize that someone who went so far to make an inquiry has some interest in this case, the state of Vermont. So I hope we look at something like that because I think there's an incredible peripheral benefit to the relocated worker program. It doesn't necessarily translate into a $5,000 grant. It's people who start learning about Vermont as a result of this, sex appeal or whatever the program has. They start asking questions. They know Vermont appears to be a welcoming place, and they find out about all the other qualities that we have. So, it's not just the people who apply, but the potential pool of people that can be connected with. It doesn't sound like there's a formal process right now. And, I've always felt that one-on-one incentives and connections to people is, more important than, a TV ad that says, come to Vermont and work. It's a beautiful place. I think people are in a lot of ways. I don't mean to dismiss Madison Avenue, but a lot of people are are less likely to respond. I guess some people respond to that and other people respond to other things, but it's food for thought. We've learned a lot here. So this is the new presentation. The 3.4 million. What generally is that the out-of-state advertising, and you sort of talked about this at the beginning, but what are the primary functions of the base budget?
So the base budget for the Department of Tourism would be, our primary mission is still in promoting visitation to the state. So that's where, our base budget does not have a carve out for relocation necessarily. We do have Think Vermont staff, people who are working on Think Vermont as part of our staff and their time put into it, but we haven't yet had the resources to put paid marketing behind that. So our paid dollars are really focused on visitation. This would be a way to really get our hat in the ring in terms of relocation. And I definitely take your point in terms of I think in terms of the folks that are thinking about moving here and then they see the incentive, and that, that may be exactly what really seals the deal for them. Then I think there is an opportunity to then bring them back into the pipeline, because we know that retention is also a big part of this. And that's, again, where the regions can really help us as a state make sure that when folks have made the decision to move here, that they become part of the community and they feel that Vermont is their home.
Okay. Heather, really appreciate this. We needed this update. Is there more in your budget that we should know about before we take a break here and move on?
I don't think so. I think that, when you do see the ups and downs for the Department of Tourism, you will see a huge one-time up, because we have both this relocation proposal in our budget, as well as we'll be asking for the spending authority for the EDA money. But just to clarify that our base budget remains the same, we are doing everything we can with that. And, I hope that, in total, we can continue to show, how effective the Department of Tourism can be, so that we can come back to a question of maybe increased base level funding after these one-time resources are no longer part of the picture.
So just my own curiosity, I don't know if you can answer this. I get pretty confused when I see a one-time funding spread out over 3 years. Is that sort of the beginning stages of building the base? Usually one-time funding was for 1 year. Now you have a larger number and you spread it over 3 years. It's still general fund dollars that reduce the amount of general funds that are available for the next 3 years. I don't know if it's a fair question to ask you, or if it's above both of our pay grades at this point, but that is a concern.
Well, I mean, fair point. Maybe it's best to think about it. Yes, it's one-time money that would come to us one time, but we just recognize that this work takes time. And so we would expect the scope of work to be able to be effective would take 3 years to do that. And we feel that level of predictability and sustainability for the regions is really important for them to know that they're going to have more than just 1 year to actually do this work.
Good answer. I like it. Thank you. Okay, let's take a 10-minute break, come back at 10 after 10. Let's see if that's about right. Yep.